I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Chu. We now recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Ellmers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for being here today on this issue. Mr. Allen, my questions are for you. I have a couple of situations that I've run into with constituents, small businesses back in North Carolina on basically the GSA scheduling issues. I'd like to ask you about some of the, or what the process is sometimes if there's the possibility of some of the abuses that could happen. One directly would be if a small business is deemed to be not a small business and something other than or larger than a small business but has received funding. What is the process that would happen if they have already received some funding? What is the process that should take place? How prevalent is this? And how are abuses like that monitored?
Well, some of it is dependent on the basis upon which the initial contract award was made. So if the initial contract award was made based on small business size standard and the business in question is no longer small, a proper notification should be given by the business to the government agency that it is no longer small, and then it's up to the agency to decide whether that they need to actually keep this as a set-aside piece of business, in which case they would, at some point in the not-too-distant future, after receiving that information, cancel the current contract and then go out and recompete among eligible small businesses. Contracting officers in the government as well have the ability to ask businesses of any size to recertify their size status at the time of any task order being issued against that contract, and small businesses have to answer. Your question, however, is a very good one, because that's what's supposed to happen. In reality, there isn't always the communication that should take place between the contractor and the buying agency, and the buying agency sometimes does not ask the questions that perhaps it should ask about a company's small business status. Typically, it's usually up to a competitor company to call attention to change in size status or some other issue with an existing contract. And then, again, it's up to the agency usually to decide, well, do we want to maintain this as a small business set-aside, or are there other opportunities that we can do as small business set-asides and still continue to do business with a company that's no longer small but is meeting our needs?
Just as a follow-up question to that, and this is a very specific situation, if the Small Business Administration had been the one to basically point out that that business was no longer considered small on more than one occasion, wouldn't you feel that was more than justification for that process to end?
Oh, yes, ma'am. There's no question. If the SBA says formally or even semi-formally that this business is no longer small, that should be the last word.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Allen, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Ellmers. Mr.